What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Allsmith. Today's going to be a very fascinating conversation where we take a deep dive into sleep. There's a version of fatigue that most people, they simply never touch, and a version of performance that's built on top of that. Today's guest has lived both ends of that spectrum. He's a former Navy SEAL turned physician and now founder of Sleep Remedy. He went back to the SEAL teams and saw something that most people ironically miss. Not a lack of discipline, not a lack of work ethic, but simply a lack of recovery based on the health biomarkers. And most operators train very hard to override biology, but then they get stuck there long after their mission ends. So today's conversation is what sleep deprivation actually does to the body, the mind, the heart, and the soul, to the brain, to the hormones, and specifically to the nervous system, and eventually a life. Inside one of the most elite performance cultures on earth, sleep seems to be one of the biggest challenges. So today we're going to dive in with Dr. Kirk Parsley. Stoked to chat it up with you today, man.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me on.
Sleep. It seems to be a cliche word that's floating around all kinds of biohacking culture, all the doctors, all the podcasts. But because it's so simple, most people are simply just kind of overlooking it. They're like, oh, I'll worry about it later. Until they see a doctor and they get a peek under the hood. They see biomarkers or they start using a data tracker. Based on like actual raw data, they eventually start to change. But what is it about sleep where high performers specifically think they can get away without it?
I mean, specifically in my culture, in the SEAL team culture, one of the things we learned during BUDS is that you can go for a week without sleep. So sleep is obviously a luxury, right? And in fact, when I started working with the SEALs as their physician, they came and listed out all of these problems they were having, which ultimately turned out to be largely linked to sleep. But they started listing out all these problems they were having, but not a single one of them said anything to me about not being able to sleep well. And I work with, entrepreneurs, C-suite executives, CEOs, all that type of stuff, multi-billionaires. They all seem to think the same thing, right? Is that, you have to outwork everybody if you're going to be on top. It means you have to be the first one into the office. You have to be the last one out. And if they all think that, well, then, the competition just keeps spreading and everybody keeps thinking working harder. And the SEAL teams, we used to say, that you could do anything you wanted to. You just had to put your head down and run harder. And I think that's kind of the belief system of most sort of hard charging, ambitious, especially young men, but I think women as well.
When you look at that, man, the world is romanticizing it because there's validation around more is better instead of better being better. It works in the beginning because you're going from probably not as much competition. You start to get exposure, in this case, to other SEALs or other people that are in pursuit of being the 1% of the 1%. And when you take that percentage and you relate it to entrepreneurship, you relate it to just competition in the world, inevitably people are going to try to find their edge, right? Like, okay, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Pain is just, weakness leaving the body. There's who's going to carry the boats. Wake up at 4:30 in the morning, gets romanticized by Jocko. And all these things work to get you to that element of top in your field. But the thing that's interesting to me is it works until it doesn't work anymore. And I think if we can create this psychological understanding around seasons, hey, there's seasons for sprints. There's seasons to back off, rest, and digest. And there needs to be a psychological and a physiological understanding around, you've got this nervous system. And if it's constantly in fight or flight and not sleeping, inevitably the batteries are going to run out. But that's the side that's like really highlighted and gets the trophies and the pat on the back and the claps and the notoriety. The sleep and the rest and digest is kind of like, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead. How do you reframe that ideology when somebody used that element of discipline and work ethic to become so successful, and then all of a sudden it's not working for them anymore and they're seeing a depreciation in their performance?
Yeah, well, I not to self-aggrandize, but when I first started talking about this back in 2009, I literally got laughed out of the room when I was telling people that their hormones were low because they weren't sleeping well. When you're 20 to 25 years old and you're metabolically and physiologically so resilient that you're just really hard to kill and you can recover from anything. Like you said, you can do stupid things. You can make poor choices, not just with sleep, but with how you train and how you eat and all sorts of things. Things just aren't as consequential when you're young and, just very, very resilient. You're kind of made of rubber. You have these, indestructible levels of energy and I always like to, sort of get rid of this cultural idea about these super sleepers where, there's been some genes that have been discovered. And what you'll hear in the media is there are genes that have been discovered that prove that show that some people don't need to sleep as much as others, significantly less than others. And that's not true. What there has been, and I think probably guys like Donald Trump is one of these guys. He claims to sleep 4 hours a night. Jocko sleeps about 7 hours a night, so that's not too far out of the norm. I wouldn't put him in that category, but there are people who say, 5 hours of sleep a night and they're fine. What the research actually showed is that those people don't suffer as much as everybody else when they don't sleep as long as they should. 7.5 to 8.5 hours plus or minus kind of 15 minutes is really about 99.99999% of the society. The odds that you have this super sleeper gene where you're not going to suffer as much as everybody else is about the same as, getting struck by lightning and attacked by a shark at the same time. So you probably don't have that. It's like 0.00003% of the population that has that. And again, they would still be better off if they slept more. And, to your point, there's a lot of people out there that consider it a luxury and something you can push past because they've done it. They've pushed past it. The biggest problem that I came across with the SEAL teams and what I continually come across today, even with, the lay audience being way more educated on sleep now than they were, 16, 17 years ago. The one thing that I continually come across is people thinking that they're okay not sleeping as much as they should. But the research shows that our introspection, right, our own self-awareness, our self-assessment of how well we are doing is impaired by sleep deprivation. So it's really very similar to alcohol. And I don't know if you saw my TED Talk, but in my TED Talk, I give this metaphor of like, what if your surgeon took a shot right before doing your surgery? An alcohol shot, you'd be freaked out, right? But there's been a lot of research to show the comparison between intoxication and sleep deprivation. And it parallels really well in, decision-making, errors, neuromuscular coordination, endurance, muscular strength, all of that stuff. It all decays as you deprive yourself of sleep. It all decays, obviously, as you get intoxicated. But what also decays in both of those is your own self-assessment, right? After you've had 4 or 5 beers, you're like, I'm fine. I can do whatever I want to. I feel like Superman, right? And when you wake up with inadequate sleep, as you alluded to earlier, your body compensates by secreting more stress hormones. And those stress hormones, cortisol, elevate your obviously elevates your blood glucose, and norepinephrine is adrenaline for the brain, epinephrine, adrenaline for the body. That gets secreted and you feel pretty good, especially if you have some really loud, obnoxious alarm that, shocks you out of sleep, and you wake up and, like you said, maybe, 2/3 of the way up to fight or flight as far as how your adrenals are reacting. And, if you've ever been in a fight or flight situation, you feel very alert. You feel very capable, right? Like you're not going to fall asleep during a fist fight, unless you get knocked out, right? You're not going to fall asleep during a car crash. You're not going to fall asleep if somebody's shooting at you. You're not going to fall asleep if you're getting, tracked by a tiger or something, right? Fight or flight, does make you feel superhuman, and you are superhuman while you're in fight or flight. For those who don't know, is actually the maximum adrenal response that you're capable of producing. So, the only thing that really gets impaired in fight or flight is your prefrontal cortex, which is your decision-making executive skills, but your lungs fill more, your cardiovascular system improves, right? Your cardiac output improves, your blood glucose goes up, your alertness goes up, your pupils dilate, you can see more, your pain threshold goes up, your reflexes get faster, you increase your endurance, you increase your strength, you're superhuman. But the cost of fight or flight is that you have shut down everything anabolic, all the rest, all the digestion, all the recovery, all the repair has all been shut down, and you are using your body's resources, your body itself, as the fuel to get through that stressful situation. And if you run around, 50% of the way there all the time, you're continually using your body as a fuel source, and which is a catabolic activity and makes it hard to maintain good body composition and energy levels and all that other stuff. But it also impairs the prefrontal cortex, affects your emotions, your decision making, your cognition, your memory, your executive functioning, and all that.
Yeah, it's very well said, so we can get a better understanding physiologically as to what's taking place. But I'm still curious. Guys operate this way, and they get away with it for quite some time. So cognitively, it's downloading an operating system that is creating proof of concept that seemingly is reliable. Most guys get away with it, I would assume, from age 17 to 28, close to 30. And then all of a sudden, their adrenals start to shut down. And then they might even get away with it a little bit longer because there's different forms of caffeine. There's guys using Zen all the time now, especially in the military community, where nicotine is now, tinkering with cognitive function. And then you get liquid courage being alcohol. And then you get
and Adderall and modafinil.
Yeah, and then you look at there's a lot of things that mask the biological and the physiological response, and that works for a really long time. You're like, I'm just feeling a little off today. I just need some meds. Kind of get over the hump. And now that I've coached quite a few of these guys, I've had in-depth conversation. I've talked to a lot of former SEALs that have now transitioned into this next chapter of their life. A lot of former athletes that have transitioned into the next chapter of life. And the cognition changes, man. It's like, man, if I would have just surrendered sooner and realized that I couldn't keep having those California burritos and smashing those energy drinks 3 or 4 times a day, and staying up late with the boys and going to grab 6 to 8 beers, but still waking up for that 5:30 a.m. muster. And then when I should be resting during the day, I got addicted to doom scrolling because I was just looking for escapism. And as a byproduct, you get away with it until you don't. And so from a very stubborn, high-performing, high testosterone, the ego hasn't been deconstructed yet for a lot of these guys. I would argue that they get romanticized by their feelings. I feel good. Why should I listen to you? And then it becomes confrontational, right? And it becomes this social hierarchy, as opposed to surrendering to the fact that coaches, doctors, scientists, people that are in the realm have graduated past that feeling, and they now understand the reality of, quite frankly, AGE, aging.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's a lot in there. Like you said, you can compensate for as long as you can compensate. but the way I motivated the SEALs, when I showed up to the SEAL team as their physician, they already knew that SEALs had a problem with anabolic hormones. They knew that their anabolic hormones were low. They knew their catabolic hormones were high. Nobody knew why. Everybody just kind of, it was a little hush hush about it, going, well, it's probably guys who abused steroids in the past. And so we don't want to make a big show of the whole thing. But like I said, I had been a doctor for 4 years when I showed up to the SEAL teams as their doctor. I'd never had a single class on sleep in medical school. I didn't know anything about sleep that anyone else in the community didn't know. I went through BUDS. I went through Hell Week. I went through residency. I thought sleep was kind of optional as well. When I started researching what sleep was, and again, the SEALs never complained to me about not being able to sleep. They complained to me about their mood and their body composition and their energy and their motivation and their cognition and their memory and like all that kind of stuff. They didn't complain about sleep. But when I started really digging into sleep, what happens when you sleep, primarily because they were all taking Ambien, and I started digging into, what does Ambien even do? Like, how does Ambien help with sleep? What is sleep? Like, I didn't even really know what sleep was, other than, you went unconscious. And so I started learning about sleep. I started learning about the side effects of Ambien, and I started thinking, well, pretty much all these symptoms could be explained by poor sleep or inadequate sleep. I wasn't naive enough to think it would explain everything that was going on. And the SEALs do have a big component of traumatic brain injuries. Overpressurization blast injuries is a big problem in our community. So that is a component of it. But the first thing I did was get everybody off of Ambien and get everybody to minimize their drinking, do their drinking earlier, make sure that they stayed hydrated. And we were getting guys to tripling their total testosterone and free testosterone, tripling, quadrupling their IGF-1, dropping, their oxidative markers, their inflammatory markers, guys feeling great, guys hitting PRs in their early 40s, because they had been beating themselves down so long. And all of their testosterone were low. Like the whole community, everybody was low because everybody was chronically sleep deprived and everybody's chronically overtrained and chronically undernourished. And it was just a massive problem. But something you alluded to at the beginning of that statement was, it was our culture, right? We had cultural norms that everybody kind of felt those same ways. And so everybody figured out ways to compensate. For example, like every SEAL carried a backpack. Everywhere he went, he had a backpack with him, and he had everything that he needed in his backpack, and he had it in a very specific place that he put it in every single time. And the reason for that is because if he didn't carry the backpack, he forgot everything. He left his house, realized he forgot his badge, go back in and get his badge, his ID or whatever, get in the car, start leaving again, realize he, forgot his lunch or whatever. And they'd leave their house 3 or 4 times before they could actually get where they're going. Or they go from their platoon space over to the classroom and they realize, oh, I forgot this, that, what I needed. I forgot my computer. I forgot this. And so they all became hyper organized in these backpacks and took them with them everywhere they went. But then they get out of the military and they go into, the generalized business culture, and they try to live like, 25 to 35-year-old kind of younger generations. They're competing with jobs for these people. And they don't have all their compensatory techniques anymore, right? Like their culture's different, their schedule's different. And that's when guys really start noticing some deficiencies in their performance, right? If they've managed to keep it together physically, they start going, man, I really kind of suck. I'm really kind of forgetful. I'm really having a hard time concentrating. I come unprepared a lot. They're usually not going to show up late, but they start noticing that the compensatory techniques that they used to use, which they're no longer using, aren't were super important to their life, and they didn't know it because they were immersed in the culture.
Yeah, it's well said. I think there's a statement that I've heard time and time again. If you always put things back in the same place, you never have to wonder where they are. And what happens is that works when there's guardrails, which the military does a phenomenal job of like, hey, there's two ways to do things, right and again. And there's consequences when you don't do them the right way, especially if you make the same mistake over and over again. And I think that kind of is in alignment with, if you want to predict behavior, you have to have some sort of incentive. Oh, if you put things back in the same place, you're going to be on time. You don't have to wonder where it is. The reward is consistency. You don't have to think about it. You can use your brain capacity for other things like passing that exam or understanding, you know, packing your parachute or whatever things are associated with the current system of training. The problem is when you get into the real world, nobody's looking over your shoulder telling you what to do. There's not consequences if you don't make your bed. And the philosophy psychologically becomes, I had structure my whole life. I don't really want structure anymore. I kind of want to screw off a little bit. Yeah. I want freedom. I want space. Most guys want to grow a beard at that point. They want to wake up late. They want to do what they want, when they want, how they want, which is totally fine. Everybody deserves a vacation from it all sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's when that escapism starts to bleed that I think the real cognitive dissonance starts to take place, where it's like, whoa, you start to romanticize your time in the SEAL teams, your time as a pro athlete, your time when you were younger. And then as a byproduct, depression and anxiety starts to come in. Back in the day, I had X, Y, and Z things. You're worried about the future because you don't really know the bridge and transferable skills. And so I go back to it. The concept here that I'm very curious around is buy-in, because sleep is free. Yeah. And so telling somebody to sleep more, they're like, I'm paying you this much, or my insurance company's this, or I have to set up these appointments. You're doing this like just to tell me to sleep. But it's probably the most valuable thing on the planet that most people don't do. And if they did it, it would unlock so many different amazing things for their future. So real quickly to like summarize that, you talked about once you got guys away from Ambien, away from alcohol, and just putting more time and attention into sleep, they started experiencing PRs, better body composition, less inflammation, less brain fog, better quality of life. But I would assume right at the beginning, they're so used to relying on the Ambien and the alcohol and things that like they probably have a significant decline. Based on the level of alcohol that they're consuming, they might get the shakes, they might have withdrawals. That first 2 to 3 months when they're experiencing probably a decline in performance and more negative symptoms, how do you manage that and create the buy-in for the future that's a little bit more delayed gratification?
Yeah, well, I don't really know if I could have gotten buy-in if we had to go through something like that. So I was very careful as to how we, how we decreased, how we went about changing lifestyle. So, now I'm a performance optimization physician now. Like that's what I do with private clients. So it's 95% of it's lifestyle. And then we do hormones and peptides and hyperbarics and, saunas and ice baths and all that other crap. But like we can add in all of, like you said, the seasoning or the spice at the end. But, sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress mitigation is how you maintain a healthy life. Fortunately, when I was working with the SEALs, by the time they started coming and complaining to me, we had already hired our nutritionist. We already had a strength and conditioning coach. So we had somebody programming their exercises, which was way smarter than anything we'd ever had when I was a SEAL. And so we, and we have this, this saying in the SEAL teams, moderation, and even then only in moderation. And so what I tried to approach it that way, and regardless of what the pharmaceutical industry will tell you, Ambien is highly addictive. It's a very, very hard, very hard drug to come off of psychologically. Because people believe that it's helping them sleep. It doesn't help you sleep at all. You actually end up getting less sleep with Ambien. You fall asleep on average 24 minutes faster, sleep an average of 17 minutes longer, but REM sleep declines by 80% and deep sleep declines by 20%. So overall, it's a net negative. But, it does dissociate you, and it makes you not remember laying in bed awake. And so you feel like you've slept more. And people get psychologically addicted to that. And the most common reason for insomnia, is that you can't sleep because you're worried that you're not going to be able to sleep. And so that's, what I worked on with these guys, from the beginning, is instead of just saying, hey, we're going to cut your Ambien cold turkey and cause you to this freak out session, I converted their Ambien to a serum through a compounding pharmacy, and 10 drops was a full dose. And so they did a week of 10 drops, and a week of 9, 8, 7, 6, all the way down. And then I gave them, a list of supplements. They were having to, drive around Coronado and buy them all themselves, but a list of supplements to take before they went to bed, which is what, later became the sleep remedy. And then I would, have them decrease their alcohol intake and do it earlier, right? So I wouldn't try to tell, a 28-year-old SEAL to quit drinking. That's just a non-starter. But if he was having six beers a night, I'd say, hey, what if you try to cut that back down to maybe 3 beers, and then maybe we'll get that down to 2, and then maybe the occasional 1 or something. But, it was a protracted thing. But how I motivated them was by, doing labs on them. And I did a full, 98, panel, markers. I basically had them do every lab I knew how to interpret, and I could show them, their progress, and I could show them, the vast majority of the guys came in my office. I could tell them honestly, hey, you have the free testosterone of a 9-year-old girl, and, and you're Navy SEAL, and you're trying to carry 200 pounds on your back and jump over a wall and kick in a door. And this isn't going to work. The traditional doctor in me, I was trained how to recognize and treat disease, and the traditional doctor in me, what my community would have said was, well, if their testosterone is low, give them testosterone, and if they're right, and if their inflammation is high, we'll give them Motrin or whatever. And I wasn't allowed to give them testosterone. SEALs have to be forward deployable. They have to be able to go to austere environments. They can't be dependent on any medication. So if you give them any medication that they need to use every day, or even chronically, then they're incapacitated by definition when they don't have it. So they're not deployable. They can't really be SEALs anymore, and they'd rather die than be pulled out of their job. So, my way of doing it was very gradual. Most of the guys who came into my office had been suffering, 4, 5, 6 years. So, what was another, 3 months to kind of, see gradual improvement instead of trying to cut everything off, cold turkey. And even with private clients, I find it just a little too disruptive to the psyche to try to cut things off cold turkey, whether they're using benzos or whether they're using Z drugs, whatever they're using as a sleep aid. I usually titrate it down at the same time as teaching sleep hygiene and, sleep tactics and strategies for when they do have insomnia.
This little thing right here, it's pretty cool. One of our missions with Allsmith was to find affordable brands that we can partner with that seamlessly fit into people's day-to-day lifestyles. And the Kalo Current Ring absolutely does that. It's non-invasive. You can use it when you're doing any activity in life, and it keeps track of your data and helps with your steps, with enhancing your habits, with understanding your HRV, and most importantly for me and so many people in the world, keeping you accountable with sleep. So check out the Current. That's pronounced current, but spelled QRNT. And it's from our good friends and our new partner, Kalo. I love your approach. I actually think dosage is one of the hardest things to manage when it comes to medications. And I like that you measured it in the form of drops in a tincture form from a compounding pharmacy. That's really cool. So that way they're not sitting there having to cut an Ambien into different pieces to try to
Ambien in 10 pieces.
Yeah, that's a pain in the ass. And, obviously that's not consistent. So it's pretty cool, your psychological approach. In a world, Dr. Kirk, that's so fascinated with outcome, there has to be the conversation around the business side of things. Were you covered by the VA? Were you a cash only private practice? Like most SEALs, they want results and they want results fast. So testosterone is a quick fix until it's not.
Yeah.
And I think what you described as being incapacitated because now you're reliant on a medication, which now diminishes your ability to perform your job at a high level if you don't have access to that medication, especially for longer deployments. And from my understanding, most of those medications need to also be refrigerated. So transport and things can be difficult.
Yeah, all the peptides pretty much need to be refrigerated. Yeah.
Sure. And so based on that, how did you create lifestyle understanding? Like, I think your timeline is spot on. Like, I think most guys for about 4 to 6 years, they're like, I'll just keep grinding. I'll keep trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. I'll do what I once did and I'll see if it works. Then over the course of time, like, especially modern day, they'll listen to a podcast. They'll try a couple changes. Usually it's like they'll bullshit those changes and they'll be like, oh, it didn't work. Let me try the next thing. And some things work a little bit, some don't, but they're kind of addicted to the feeling. I feel good. I feel this. I feel that versus getting real data that's going to give you a long-term feeling rather than just this like short-term burst. But the mind is very much like short-term memory. Like what have you done for me lately? Whether that's a human, whether that's a coach, whether that's a doctor, whether that's medication. And when something seemingly stops working, I feel like high performers have the ideology of like find what works and do more of it. If it stops working, change course. So for guys that, want those quick results, like, do you have the conversation of like, hey, what you were doing wasn't working, which is why you ended up in my office in the first place, to have this consult, to look at your labs, to have a course of action that is going to upgrade your operating system. Because if nothing changes, nothing changes. Do you want to go back to the experiences of the last 4 to 6 years? Or do you want to, do you want to make the rest of your life the best of your life? And that's going to start with you taking ownership and accountability for your choices consistently, providing honest feedback as to what's going into your system, and being able to wean yourself off these Ambiens, this alcohol, these things that are toxic to the system in order to enhance health biomarkers and testosterone and mitigate inflammation and overall get better sleep. But how is that process for you? Are guys in just so much chronic pain and depression really that they're just like willing to try anything at that point?
Yeah. So when I was working with the SEALs, like when I was actually at the SEAL team as their physician, the guys who came in my office, I mean, many of those guys would have liked to had help years before, but they weren't willing to trust the medical profession to help them without disqualifying them. So they were trying to do things on their own or just trying to push past it, like you say. However, they were exceedingly motivated, right? I mean, these guys were desperate to get back what they had. Now, honestly, we do age and we don't ever, performance does decline over lifetime. Like there's no way around that. Like, I was a competitive power lifter for years, and at 56, every lift I have now is depressing if I compare myself to my prime. So it's like now I have different goals. But these guys were still actively working as SEALs. And so they were still comparing themselves against other SEALs. And I could show them, like I was saying, first of all, everybody who came in my office, they got a 3-hour lecture about what sleep does and how sleep affects hormones and when your hormones are made and, what anabolic hormones were and what catabolic hormones were and how their sleep deprivation was impacting this and that and how their sleep schedule was impacting this and that and how Ambien was impacting that and how alcohol was impacting that. But it's a community, very word of mouth community. So one guy comes in and starts getting help from me. He sends his buddy and he sends his buddy and he sends his buddy. But now they're all competing against each other too, right? So now we started building kind of a culture where they're competing not only for, what I'm intervening on, like, trying to decrease alcohol, decreasing their, titrating off their Ambien, increasing their time of sleep, encouraging them to take naps when they have time in between training blocks, they have a little downtime. When I was a SEAL, we didn't have cell phones. And so when we had a break in training, everybody slept. Like, that's all anybody ever did, during downtime, was take a nap. And then I started showing them their own labs back and be like, look, your total testosterone went from 300 to 900 just from you making these changes. And your free testosterone is tripled as well. And explain to them that anabolic effect. And of course, they feel that and they start feeling more vigorous. They feel like they can work harder. And then they're competing with their buddies about who has the highest testosterone level, and like who can now get the best lift if they were, competitors before or whatever. And that was very simple. And I still work with SEALs today. I work with SEALs through Foundation. So I've never charged a SEAL for my treatment, for my time, and I never will. But the foundation, there's foundations that will pay for all of their medications, all their peptides, any treatment I prescribe, hyperbarics if I wanted to do that, stem cells if I wanted to do that, whatever I need them to do. There's foundations that will pay for my help through them. And like I said, my time I don't charge them for, and my wife does the same for their wives. And we, like, that's our sort of our philanthropic work. But the reason I point that out is because these guys are no longer competing against other SEALs when they come out, right? They come out of the SEAL teams. I mean, most of the guys I see are retired, right? So they've spent 20 plus years in the SEAL teams, and they've had, 6 to 10 surgeries, and they've had hundreds of head injuries, overpressurization, blast injuries, thousands perhaps. And they come to me through word of mouth. They know who I am. I've usually helped one or two or three of their buddies. So they trust me. But I start from square one, right? Like day one, I'm like, hey, I know you're going to be resistant to this, but every tool that I have that I can offer you, I mean, I could give you all the pharma, all the supplements, all the peptides, all the hormones, hyperbaric, light treatment, laser therapy, shockwave, saunas, cold. I give you all of that, and none of that adds up to getting good sleep. Like getting quality sleep and having a good, healthy lifestyle, orders of magnitude more powerful than all of those other things. And so if you aren't willing to do that, then we're not going to be successful, and we should just, go away as friends before we disappoint each other. And I've actually had a few guys say, I'm not ready to do that. And I go, okay, well then we don't do that. That's just the way it goes. And then, sometimes those guys come back later, and sometimes I never hear from them again. But that's how I approach it. I harp on everyone. I don't care how elite they are. I mean, I work with, professional athletes as well. I like I said, I do take private clients. Those are the guys who actually pay my bills. I have the same conversation with them. My screening to be my patient, my screening questionnaire is, it's about 4 pages long, and there's 5 or 6 times in there that it says, you have to be willing to spend 8 hours in bed every night. You have to, it just kind of reiterates that over and over again. That's how I go about it.
I think it's really cool that you have that upfront, honest conversation, because, man, humans are such great justifiers. I can't sleep because I've got these responsibilities with, my new kid, or I've got my responsibilities with this, or I've got my responsibilities with workflow, or, obviously there's so many different challenges that step in, and there's a lot of pushback when it comes to it. I can't sleep for X, Y, and Z reason. But at the end of the day, like, it's seemingly from so many different doctors that I speak to and experts that I speak to, it seems to be like the number one cheat code. And unfortunately, creating the consistent buy-in around that is incredibly difficult over and over again. It seems to be the most effective thing you can do to reset your brain and your body. And even by saying that, people are like, whatever, I don't really want to do it because of X, Y, and Z reason. And so I I still want to keep pushing on that, because I've got a lot of clients who are like, I've got a newborn, or I've got this really difficult thing with my job. I think it goes back to that conversation we talked about with seasons. And I think if sleep becomes a major priority, you actually build yourself buffers for the more challenging seasons a little bit. What are your thoughts on that? Where, let's just use Hell Week as an example, where there's minimal sleep exposure, where there's so many different hours and your circadian rhythm gets thrown off, decision-making gets tough. But you could relate that to a brand new parent. You could relate that to somebody that's first stages of entrepreneurship. Not exactly the same, but there's relatable characteristics of those seasons. How do you help people understand this concept of creating buffers? And maybe within those seasons, what advice do you give to people to try to maximize their maybe limited exposure to that 8-hour window in bed?
Yeah, well, I can say I've probably done several hundred lectures to first responders who, there's always a shift work component to that. And there are people who are sleeping outside of their circadian rhythm, and there's a lot of people not getting enough sleep. And, I always preface it with saying, I do this for a living. This is my expertise. And I would say 5 out of the 7 nights every week, I don't really want to go to bed when it's time to go to bed. I'm like, man, I really wish I could do this, but I know what the better solution is, right? And so, I think the most important thing, the most important step for me, and then we'll talk about the specific sort of seasons or how to implement techniques when you can. The most important part for me is that people understand how important sleep is. Once people understand how important sleep is, they can usually find a way to do it. However, if I'm only getting them to adjust their schedule because I'm telling them that sleep is the most important thing for them, that usually doesn't end very well, right? Because that's just my voice, and all I have to do is quit taking my calls, and hey, all that noise is gone. You don't have to ever think about that again, right? So, what I usually tell people to do, we sit down, we talk about what are your goals, right? What are your ambitions? What do you value? So you take your values, you take your goals, however you want to do it. You go into a credible source, Google Scholar or PubMed or something, and you put in what you care about and sleep. So parenting and sleep, or, whatever, cognitive functioning and sleep, emotional intelligence and sleep, physical performance and sleep, whatever you want to do. And you read until you're petrified. You read until you realize you're a total fool for not getting sleep, and it is the most important thing in the world. Once you buy that concept, you're going to be creative. I mean, I don't know your life. I don't know your day to day. You could never explain it to me to where I could understand it. Maybe I could follow you around for a month and be pretty close to you, but you're the best coach you have for sleep, right? You're the one who's going to be able to figure out what you can and you can't do. And so I use a few guiding principles for that. I tell the parents of newborn, the way the science breaks out, when you have a newborn baby, both parents are going to lose 6 months of sleep in the first 2 years, right? So you're going to lose 25% of your sleep. However, and that's just the way it goes, man. I mean, the shift workers always want to come up to me and ask me basically how I can make 2 + 2 not equal 4, because shift workers die earlier, have more disease, more heart disease, more strokes, more, like, you name it, like they have worse health. And they want me to tell them how to get around that. Not doing shift work is the only way to get around that. But something like new parents, you're going to lose sleep. However, you don't both have to lose 6 months of sleep in the 2, and right? You could shift that. You could take turns doing that. And it's very unsexy, but maybe you go down and you sleep in the basement, or you sleep in the spare room. One of you wear earplugs and an eye mask and a white noise machine and a fan, whatever you need to do. And one person gets a great night's sleep, and the other person deals with the kid that night. That's one way to go around it. Shift workers, I I coach on the things that they can do to mitigate, right? Like you can start blocking the blue light, the last 3 hours of your shift. You go home, you get as much sleep as you can possibly get as soon as you can possibly get it. That's usually tough buy-in because most shift workers are coming home when their family's getting up early, getting ready for school, all that stuff. So there's challenges. There's always going to be challenges there. There's always going to be people who say, well, I'm a business. I do business overseas, and all of the people who I work with, I'm on a phase shift. I'm on a 6-hour to 4-hour difference with them, so I have to get up super early or I have to stay up super late. And I can't prevent that. All I can tell you is that you are making a choice that has consequences, and there's nothing that I can do about that. I can teach you all the techniques in the world to mitigate it, and maybe we can reduce the impact of your choices by 25%, right? Or maybe, best case scenario, maybe we reduce the impact, the consequences 50%. But if I can instill in you the value, the understanding, the priority that sleep is the most powerful performance enhancing tool you have. It is the most powerful longevity tool that there is. The only time you're recovering is while you're sleeping. That's it. So when you work out, you don't get stronger. You get weaker when you work out. When you go to sleep and you recover, you can get stronger. When you push your aerobic capacity, you don't get better, you get worse. When you sleep, you can recover. When you learn, you don't learn all that information. You hold it in short-term memory and some various other emotional categories of your brain. And then when you go to sleep, you can actually convert that into long-term memory and start comparing it with other information and actually know that. Your emotional intelligence is completely dictated by how well you sleep, because when you sleep, that's affecting your cognitive and emotional energy for the next day, but it's also when you're emotionally categorizing everything that's ever happened in your life. And so if you're getting chronically bad sleep and you're not emotionally categorizing things well, things that are should be emotional, nothings can be huge emotional triggers. It changes your like we talked about the fight or flight. The amygdala is the region of your brain that kind of dictates fight or flight. That region of your brain becomes hyperactive. Everything becomes more threatening to you. Your communication gets worse. Your trust of people gets worse. You become more hypervigilant. That creates more stress hormones. And once you just convince people that, hey, man, you are destroying your life by your choices. And I'm here to tell you, like, you can improve that marginally with all of these techniques, and we can do things to help you increase your hormones, and we can use peptides to help encourage circadian alignment or to improve cognition or to make sure you don't lose as many brain cells or increase your growth hormone production, whatever. We can do these things, but those are small levers, man. The big lever is actually the lifestyle. I used to teach when I first started lecturing that there were 4 pillars of health, like I listed off earlier, that sleep, exercise, nutrition, and stress mitigation. I've shifted that slide now to where there's exercise, there's nutrition, there's exercise, and there's stress mitigation. They sit on the platform of sleep. Because if you aren't sleeping well, none of that other stuff works. And sleep enhances all of those things. And when you do those things well, that all enhances sleep as well.
That's awesome, man. I like that you put those 3 pillars on top of the platform of sleep. I also think it's important to note for people that, might just listen to a portion of this podcast or clips rather than the long form and gain total context. You don't get results from the work you didn't do. So if people just decide, hey, I'm going to sleep all the time, and they're not actually doing their work, they're not doing the job, like you have to recover from some sort of stress. So, whether that's physical stress and working out, or that's, your job, or you need to write a certain brief or an article or edit something, like, you still have to do all of those things. And optimal sleep, roughly in the realm of 7 to 9 hours, can make all of those things better, but you still have to put in the work. Can you help people understand that a little bit more? Because I think right now we're in this... Bryce and Dr. Kirk talked about sleep. If I just sleep, the rest of my life will be the best of my life. For people that are innately like, yeah, I put in the work, like that's going to work phenomenally for them, really. It's like the secret ingredient that's been missing. Right. But for a lot of people, it's like they're not actually putting in the work early, and they're just kind of coasting through life, playing around with distraction and dopamine addiction and not sleeping. So then inevitably the brain is just becoming this cognitive mush that's really unmotivated. And, you know, what are your thoughts and advice around that narrative?
Yeah. So, I mean, as you alluded to, becoming the person you're meant to be, living the life, living the purpose that you believe is the highest purpose or the most desirable purpose for your life that you want to live. That all requires growth, right? And the only reason anything ever grows is due to resistance, right? I mean, why do astronauts lose all their muscle and bone mass when they go into space? Because there's no more resistance, right? It's like you have to continually you have to be pushing against something to be growing. So you know that's a basic foundational adult concept. And if you don't have that yet, you know, maybe, you know, get some sleep, get your brain in good order, and work on that. But a metaphor I give people all the time is, if you think of sleep as a repair system, right? So let's say you're really high performance, and I don't know, like you do Baja racing or something, right? And you take one of those vehicles and you're jumping sand dunes and you're going 100 miles an hour and making these crazy turns and you're damaging this vehicle. And then when you go to sleep, a team of experts come in and they fix that vehicle for you the next day when you drive it again, right? Well, if that team doesn't come in and do that, how long do you think that your vehicle is going to be performing well? Like, it's obviously not. It's going to collapse. The whole reason that I'm going to sleep tonight is because I'm using resources today and I'm damaging myself today, right? I worked out this morning. I damaged my muscles. My muscles are weaker than they were when I woke up this morning because I worked out today. And the only chance of those getting stronger is tonight. So, and I might twist my ankle. I might bang my knee on something, right? I'm definitely going to deplete ATP in my cells. I'm going to deplete glycogen stores. I'm going to deplete regions of my brain, neurotransmitters. I'm going to build up waste products, and all of that stuff has to be repaired, right? So I have to repair and then I have to prepare. So tomorrow's going to come at exactly the same time, no matter what I do. So I know it takes 8 hours to repair and to prepare for tomorrow. And by prepare, I mean, like, you know, your brain and body getting you ready for the next day, right? So we're sort of restocking the shelves. We're putting all the constituent elements into every cell that they need. We're building ATP stores back up. You know, mitochondrial functioning is ramping back up. We're getting all the waste products. We're getting all the bad stuff out of the way. We're repairing the damage. And then we're preparing for tomorrow. And then the best I will ever be, the best I can ever possibly be, is after I've had a good night's sleep. And then my day is going to start at exactly the same time, no matter what I do, right? Like that's just the way it goes. The sun's going to come up at the same time. All my responsibilities are going to be the same. So if I decide to sleep 6 hours instead of 8 hours, I need 8 hours to repair. That's just the way the world works. You can like it, not like it. Yeah, it's just the way the world works. I mean, it takes 8 hours to be able to repair and prepare from being awake for 16 hours. So if I choose to sleep 6 hours instead of 8 hours because I wanted to stay up 2 hours late and watch some stupid show that has no value to my life, whatever, I want to stay up 2 hours later and I'm going to get 6 hours of sleep. Well, I've just decreased my preparation for tomorrow by 25%. But tomorrow's still going to come at exactly the same time. I still have to do exactly all the same things. So if I'm not physiologically capable, my team didn't repair my truck, but I still have to go race it tomorrow. How do I compensate? Well, as a driver, maybe I drive more slowly. I take corners, like I'm less aggressive or something. I don't know, like whatever they could do to kind of compensate for their vehicle not being ready. As humans, we compensate by secreting more stress hormones. And those stress hormones will make us feel alert, and they will raise our blood glucose, and they will ramp up our ATP production, and they will make us feel a little more alert and a little better. But those are catabolic hormones. They're eating you. They're using you as a resource instead of instead of having all the amino acids that you need in every cell, you're going to eat your muscles as an amino acid store, to get out to get all of your cells. And so once you truly value sleep and once you understand the concept, that sleep is repair, sleep is recovery. Those are completely indistinguishable terms. You can rest during the day, but you can't recover during the day because every cell in your body, a lot of people think that the circadian rhythm is just like aligning your sleep time with your eyes and the blue light, and it's just about your brain being asleep. No, every single cell in your body is on the same circadian rhythm, and your liver cells does different things while it's asleep than it does while you're awake, or at least at different rates and in different priorities. And your heart does something, your heart cells do different things, and your liver cells do different things, and your muscles do different things, and your brain cells do different things. And so being awake and being asleep is not just a state of alertness, like that's what we can see and that's what we can measure, but there's a physiological difference in every cell in our body. And that's when they're doing the repair. That's when the repair crew is there working on your vehicle. And if you don't do that, the repair just simply doesn't happen. And then you're going to duct tape it up and baling wire it up and 550 cord it up, and you're going to, try to, compensate and, keep your vehicle on the road. But it's obviously not going to last as long, and it's not going to perform as well. And you're doing the same thing to yourself. And if that's okay with you, and if that's aligned with your goals, then that's fine with me too. Like, I'm not here to tell you what your goals ought to be, but I am here to tell you the truth. And the physiologic truth is that you cannot operate at your best without sleeping well.
I love that analogy, man. The just thinking about a team going in and repairing your vehicle for the Baja 1000 is a really cool analogy. Also, it's so true that so many of us want to duct tape things just to fix it real quick. Or, what's the famous line inside of a garage or an automotive place? If you don't want it to move and it's moving, duct tape. If you want it to move and it's not moving, WD-40. It's like...
Yeah, I haven't heard that, but I did grow up believing that duct tape, vice grips, and WD-40 could fix anything.
Totally.
Maybe a little baling wire here and there.
Totally.
But,
it's funny to think about. Yeah. And I also think it's important just to create a little highlight for people that 24 hours awake is very similar to the cognitive impairment that mirrors legal intoxication. Like, it minimizes your decision making. It makes you a step slow. You're a day late and a dollar short, maybe coming around a turn, maybe needing to respond in an appropriate way. You're probably triggered a little bit more. And your threat detection and your reaction time out in the field is now not only just putting yourself at risk, but your team at risk as well. And so it's just so interesting how sleep seems to be like one of the most important things for high performers, but it's the first thing that's sacrificed and that works to get things going.
Always.
It always is. And it works to get things going, but it doesn't work to keep things going. And I think there's a big differentiator there. Why do you think operators really struggle to downshift at nighttime? Is it ruminating thoughts? Is it anxiety for the next day? Because I would argue that sleep is the greatest setup for a green light of the next day, where it's almost like getting the coffee beans in the coffee maker. So in the morning, you just have to press go rather than cleaning out the old filter and having to go through the whole process where you get yellow lights and red lights kind of along the way. What is it about high performers and operators that they struggle to downshift at nighttime into that parasympathetic nervous system?
I think there's a lot of nuance to it, but if I wanted to roughly lump it into a category, I would say that it's all performance anxiety, because they're all competitive, and really, like, what's the worst thing for a billionaire? So lose money, right? Like, he can have all the success in the world, but lose money, and he feels like a total loser because he measures himself by money, or he wouldn't be a billionaire, right? Which, like, because, right? I mean, just nobody pushes that hard for $1 billion unless you really, really, really use money to measure yourself. Mm-hmm. And that guy can have all the success in the world, but lose money, and he feels like a failure. A SEAL, you're going into training the next day, feels like a dirtbag during training, performs poorly during training, his peers are looking down on him and judge. Like, that is the worst situation in the world for him, right? To lose the respect of his peers, worst thing in the world. And that's going to be because he doesn't perform well. Professional athletes, obviously, right? Very clear metrics. Like, you did your job really well and you won, or you did your job very poorly and you lost, and your employment prospects aren't that great for next year now, right? And business owners, same thing. Like, a lot of them are money driven, but a lot of them are simply, business scale driven too. It's like, I want to outcompete my competitor. I want my business to be, way bigger, or outperform my next competitor. I want to beat him by 30% this year or 50% this year. And so when they go to bed at night, they're usually thinking about, what they can do to perform better tomorrow, and they're trying to get ahead of it, or they're tired, they're fatigued, and they want to sleep, and they know they need to sleep, and now they're really worried that they're not going to get enough sleep and they're going to perform poorly tomorrow, right? And so that anxiety will keep them up as well. And I have this really simple worksheet which I do with people, which the worksheet itself and the setup is very rote, and it's just something you could practice. The cognitive behavioral therapy component of it just kind of clicks in whenever it clicks in for you. And it's different for everybody, but anywhere from kind of 2 to 6 weeks, you practice, these tenets, and then it'll click into place for you. But essentially you have to prepare for going to bed. Right. And one of the preparations for going to bed is understanding that the whole reason that you're going to be in bed is to perform the best you can the next day. So how do you measure that? Well, the first thing you do is you make a list, you make a to-do list, and you think about that like as far out as you're likely to worry about it. For me, that's like noon tomorrow. For my wife, it's like the next 6 months, right? So everybody's different, but your to-do list, anything you're likely to think about when you're laying in bed. Your to-worry list, anything you're likely to think about that you don't have any control over, but you're going to worry about it. And so we don't want to rob you of the opportunity to worry about it. And so you make these two lists, and then you make this mental agreement with yourself. This is where the CBT comes in. You have to rehearse this and think about this over and over again. By definition, now those two lists are the most important things to you. Otherwise, those would not be the things keeping you awake at night, right? So these things are very important for me. This is how I'm measuring my performance. This is how I'm measuring my value. The best I will ever be is after I've had a good night's sleep. And that's when I should be attacking this list of the most important things to me, right? That's just, right? That's tautological, right? That's a very simple thing to get behind. Now you spend 8 hours in bed, whether you're sleeping or not. Because I tell people the next best thing that you can do if you're not sleeping is what Andrew Huberman calls non-sleep deep rest, right? NSDR. We used to call it meditation or prayer or relaxation techniques or whatever, but it's all kind of the same thing. A really good meditator, which is very similar to a prayer state, which is very similar to breath work state, which is very slim, like. You can get down to what's really close to a theta brainwave state, which is the same as stage 3 of sleep. So you get in bed and you have this list next to your bed, and you have a pencil or pen next to that, so that if you think of something that's not on your list, you have my permission to get up and write it on your list. But here's the agreement. From the time you get in bed until the alarm clock goes off in the morning, you're not going to look at the time. You don't care what time it is, and you're going to lay in bed and you're going to rest, relax, pray, breath work, whatever you can do to get yourself in the deepest state of relaxation you can possibly be in, or you're going to be sleeping. And however long either one of those categories are, doesn't matter, because if you aren't sleeping, the next best thing you can be doing is meditating or praying or whatever. And when the alarm clock goes off is the most prepared you're going to be. regardless of what else happens. So you can't lay in bed and think about your to-do list or your to-worry list, because we've made that agreement you're not going to. It doesn't make any sense. You can't do anything about it right then anyway. The best you're ever going to be at handling that list is in the morning. So if any of those things pop in your head, you go, that's on the list. I'll think about it when I get up in the morning. I'll do that when I get up in the morning. Right now, I'm going to relax. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to do breath work. I'm going to do progressive muscle relaxation, whatever it is I dig that I want to do. And if I wake up in the middle of the night, I have to go to the bathroom. I go to the bathroom, I come back, I get in bed. I don't look at the clock, and I lay there and I start relaxing again. I start doing my deep rest. And if the alarm clock goes off 30 minutes later and I didn't fall back asleep, well, I slept 7.5 hours and I meditated for half an hour. It's ready to go. All right. If the alarm clock's not going off for 4 more hours and I lay there and start meditating, relaxing, whatever, I'm going to fall back asleep. There's no way around it. Like, you aren't going to lay there and meditate for 4 hours. That won't happen. You can lay there and ruminate and think about all the things that are on the list. But that's how I break that pattern. And like I said, the performance anxiety is what's keeping them up. And that's just like sort of a generalized category of all of that. So, people have insomnia because they're worried about they're worried that something might come tomorrow that they can't handle, essentially. So that's just like generalized anxiety. They're worried about the future. Or the most common reason is because they know that tomorrow is important and they know they aren't well rested, and they're not able to sleep because they're worried that they're not going to be able to sleep.
Yeah, I think that list is very important. Like, getting things out of your mind and onto paper. I think writing fills the gaps within our thinking. It makes it tangible versus, I don't know why I couldn't sleep. It's like, no, it's kind of like documenting your food. It allows you to really see and data track to get a clear vision as to the decisions that are being made, which are leading to either positive outcomes, negative outcomes, or stagnant or mediocre outcomes. So I think that's a really awesome approach that you shared right there. And just, it takes a ton of discipline to lay there and not get on the phone and not, the thing that I hear a lot is, well, I couldn't sleep, so I figured I'd just get up and start being productive. And I think that the thing that holds most of us back is the story that we tell ourselves. How do you manage that story for some people, that either that example that I just gave, or I also hear the example of, well, once I get up, the world's really noisy and my phone's going off and there's tons of demands, and basically I walk around with a fire extinguisher putting out fires. So I choose to get up between 2 and 3 a.m. so I can get some movement, so I can get some meditation, so I can get my sauna cold plunge, so I can get my breath work, so I can have peaceful coffee, take my morning shit, then attack the day. That's a really long time to like warm up the system. Imagine like having a strength and conditioning coach programming like an hour warm up before you even get into the workout. If you're having to take an hour to warm up, I think we need to self-reflect a little bit more. And that's where you look in the mirror around sleep, in my opinion.
It's funny you should say that. At my age, warm-ups and preparation does take more and more time, right? Your warm-up and mobility work before you actually start trying to lift anything heavy does get progressively longer. And I was recently working with a client who said, by the time I get through my warm-up and my mobility work, there's no time to work out. Like, it just takes him too long. But he had some other issues. Well, the first thing I'd say is, like, you don't have to get up at 2 or 3 a.m. to get ahead of the world, right? And if you want to get up at 4:30 or 5, you're kind of pushing it. I'd say 5's reasonable, but you still have to be in bed for 8 hours. So, I mean, if you want to make sure that you're asleep by 9 o'clock every night and get up at 5, then like, go ahead. Like that. I don't see any problem with that. I wouldn't go a whole lot earlier than that because of like I was saying, the circadian entrainment can only go so far. You can't really push yourself consistently out of phase for too long and respond to the the sunlight in the world. So, if you get up at 5, which I do quite regularly, I get up around 5:30 and the world's still really quiet, man. And I have plenty of time to get myself going. To your point, when I first started working with the SEALs, one of the most common story I heard once I started questioning them about sleep, because like I said, they never complained about not sleeping. I'd say, why are you taking Ambien? And they'd say, oh, well, yeah, I have a hard time falling asleep, or a lot of times, I fall asleep just fine, but I wake up at 4 and I can't go back to sleep. And so I think, well, I'll just go to the gym. I'll work out really hard. I won't take any naps today. I'll push through my day. And then when I come home tonight, I'll be really sleepy. I'll be really tired. It'll be easy to fall asleep. And then, of course, it isn't really easy to fall asleep. Or if it is, they still wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning the next day. And I say, and how long have you been trying that? Like, 4 years or whatever. I'm like, well, keep going today. Tonight's probably the night, right? So you have to educate people into that world, and obviously say, look, this early waking, we call that terminal insomnia. That's a symptom of elevated stress hormones. It just is. Like I said, you use stress hormones to compensate for not getting enough sleep. And when you don't get enough sleep, your basal stress hormone levels are higher during the day. And at some point, it gets harder to fall asleep at night because those stress hormones are so high. But unfortunately, in men, primarily men, it can happen to women too, but primarily in men, and athletic men very specifically, we carry a lot more muscle mass than, like, athletic men carry more muscle mass than non-athletic men, but men in general carry a lot more muscle mass than women. So if I get after it all day, I will build up adenosine, right? So adenosine is the final breakdown product of ATP. ATP being the energy source, that's 3 phosphates. I take off one of them at a time, and eventually I get down to just adenosine. And as adenosine builds up in my brain, it causes something called sleep pressure, which has nothing to do with the normal circadian rhythms. This is what builds up when you stay awake for 24 hours or for 48 hours. If you've ever been awake for 48 hours, you could lay down on a gravel road in the sun at noon and fall asleep, right? You would have no problem doing that because the sleep pressure is so high. And so we have roughly the same size head and brain as a woman, but we have 30, 40, 50% more muscle mass. So we're producing a lot more adenosine. We create a lot more sleep pressure, and usually men can get in bed and fall asleep right away. When their stress hormones are too high, though, what happens is after their brain has cleared the adenosine, they'll wake back up and now they can't go back to sleep. Women, by and large, having what we call initiation insomnia, they lay in bed and they worry about all the things that they might have done wrong or could potentially do wrong or whatever. And they have a hard time falling asleep. So, when you're thinking about recovery and the timing that you're sleeping, it's going to take 8 hours roughly, no matter when you do it. If you work out really, really, really hard, you do something way outside of your norm, you probably need more sleep. It's not static. It's not like you need exactly the same every time. You don't need exactly the same minutes every night when you go to sleep, but it's roughly about 8 hours to recover. And so, if you have this terminal insomnia or you have initiation insomnia and you're chronically getting poor sleep or inadequate sleep, you're just running higher and higher stress hormones. And your stress hormones at some point will make it hard for you to fall asleep, or it will just wake you up. And now you can't sleep because your stress hormones are high, but your stress hormones are high because you can't sleep very well, right? And so that becomes a self-propagating downward spiral. That's when you really have to work on getting people to de-stress before they're ever going to get adequate sleep. I could put you in a cold, dark cave with no way to have any sense of what time it was during the day, right? No temperature fluctuations, no light fluctuations. And I could put you in a cold, dark cave and let you go to sleep whenever you wanted to and wake up whenever you wanted to. And after you kind of paid back your sleep debt and adjusted, you'd sleep about 8 hours a night. And that would drift all over the place, but you would always sleep about 8 hours a night. And what would wake you up? Because there's no sound, there's no light, there's no temperature, there's nothing to wake you up. What wakes you up is your stress hormones. That's a normal thing. As you recover through the night, you prepare, your your body's like, okay, your brain and your body are like, okay, we're ready. We're like, everything's in place. We've done this, we've done that, we've done that. And like, now let's start waking you up. Stress hormones are good. They keep you awake in proportion to your environment, and they will wake you up. But in order to get healthy sleep, whatever level wakes you up, you need to be lower than that when you go to sleep at night.
Mm-hmm. I love
and if
that
you're using energy
explanation.
drinks
So that way
and
people,
all that, you won't.
yeah, I love that explanation so people can better understand the stress hormones. Dr. Kirk, I want to give you some heavy hitters before we wrap things up today. And just because we were talking about stress hormones just now, I'm going to give you 5 fun questions for us to explore, and then you'll kind of have a couple sentences or a minute to kind of answer. So that way, these are some great takeaways for people. What's a natural cortisol curve for people that are trying to optimize their sleep?
A natural cortisol curve. So the actual number isn't something that I could tell you. Like there's a normal sort of range.
Mm-hmm. What does the curve look like though? Like higher in the morning, kind of depreciating throughout the day?
Talk about that. There's not a normal number to wake up to, but there's a normal for you. There's a regular for you when you're well sleep adapted, and then your cortisol curve will peak at about an hour and a half to 2 hours after you wake up, but it's pretty close. It's getting pretty close to the peak as you wake up. The lowest stress hormones you will have in any 24-hour period is the first 2 to 3 hours of sleep during deep sleep. That's the lowest stress hormones you'll ever have, the highest anabolic hormones, the lowest catabolic hormones. And then over the course of the night, you're going from that near zero in deep sleep. Over the course of the night, you're gradually doing more and more REM sleep, less and less deep sleep, and your cortisol levels are getting progressively higher. At some point, they're high enough to wake you up. You get a little movement, you get a little sunlight, you get a little activity, you get a little stimulation from the world, you get a little bit higher peak than what actually woke you up. And then it just kind of starts declining throughout the day. And by the time you get in bed to go to sleep, you want it to be lower than that number that woke you up.
Yeah, that's a great explanation for sure. How does caffeine affect that? Oftentimes we hear to have hydration before caffeine in the morning, so it kind of helps with the adenosine system that you alluded to before. What does caffeine implementation look like, and when should people cut it off?
Yeah, so caffeine is a very tricky one. Caffeine, like I said, caffeine blocks the sleep pressure. It has nothing to do with sort of the rest and recovery initiative that is driving your circadian rhythm, but it's your brain's way of saying, hey man, we're spent, like we've used up all of our energy. This adenosine's high. So what caffeine does is it goes in and blocks adenosine receptors. So even if there's adenosine around, you don't feel as tired. Caffeine does stimulate through neurological processes. Because it's affecting your brain, caffeine does stimulate your adrenals to produce more stress hormones. That is wildly different on every person. How much caffeine you can tolerate is wildly different. The average half-life of caffeine is about 6 hours, but it varies from 1 to about 30. So there are some people that just do not break down caffeine very well. They can have 100 milligrams of caffeine. 2 hours later, they'll still have 100 milligrams in their bloodstream. 3 hours later, 6 hours later, they'll still have close to 100 milligrams. Some people, it's an hour and a half half-life. So they take in 200 milligrams an hour later, they have 100 milligrams an hour later, they have 50 milligrams. So you have an enzymatic response that's breaking down that caffeine. What varies wildly from one person to another. In general, people who process caffeine really quickly do not have as high of an adrenal response as people who process it slowly. And that, I think, just kind of makes sense. You have a chronically higher level of caffeine in your brain, blocking your adenosine receptors, affecting your peripheral nervous system, your autonomic nervous system, which is affecting your stress hormones.
Would you say noon to 2 p.m. is kind of the window where people should cut off caffeine for the day, like at the absolute latest?
Yeah, I know really fast metabolizers who have a cup of coffee at 3 or 4 p.m. and it doesn't seem to impact them going to bed at 10 o'clock at night. I know people who, if they drink coffee after 9 a.m., I would say the generalized rule, if you're going with the average of the population, we always saying that the half-life of caffeine being 6 hours. If you had a cup of coffee at noon, say it's 150 milligrams, you'd still have 75 you still have 75 milligrams of that at 6 p.m. And then by the time you went to bed, you might be down into the low double digits, and that would probably be okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I put it out in lectures and worksheets, I say, about noon, like try to cut caffeine off at noon.
Sure.
But there are a lot of exceptions to that. There are a lot of people who can process caffeine faster. So it's an individual thing. You can measure that. You can do cortisol curves. You can do ASIs. You can use heart rate monitoring. There's lots of ways to kind of figure out where you sit in that curve. The easiest way is to cut out caffeine altogether for a while, like taper off of it, because if you just cut it off, you'll get caffeine headaches and all sorts of response. But taper off to a near zero level maybe for a weekend, like try to get a weekend with absolutely none, and then just experiment with how long your heart rate changes after one cup of coffee.
The way I create incredible trust with doctors and scientists is based on what you exactly just did. So I just want to create extreme buy-in and gratitude with you, because the answer to most questions is it depends. It's really easy to cliche and say a specific time, but the reality is people metabolize different things differently. And so I just wanted to give you a quick little shout out that I very much appreciate the long form nuance. So that way you're not just giving a blinded numerical value that people can measure. It's like, here's something that's going to work for most people, but it depends if you're really trying to optimize. And that just tells me that you're boots on the ground. You're having these types of conversations. You're looking at the research. You're looking at the data. And I very much appreciate that. So I just want to give you a quick little high five and pat on the back. And you mentioned data trackers. I think they're awesome as far as just creating habits. And the one that you're most compliant with is the best one. And so, as we continue to explore the best habits for people, what are your thoughts on just data trackers?
I kind of publish something almost every week about data trackers, is to not use them as oracles. They're not, they're not the end all be all. They're useful as a tool, to judge trends.
Yes.
So you have to understand what about your behaviors or your activities have changed, and then compare that to the trend that you're going for. Because this data tracker is using an algorithm, right? So something like my readiness score, which I get the most complaints about, like my readiness score, like it's crap, or my HRV is crap. Right. So your HRV, it can measure, your resting heart rate, it can measure, but your readiness score, man, like there's a lot of stuff that goes involved in that. And what they're doing is making some assumptions off of a couple of variables that you're fitting into this algorithm. You may find that your sleep score when it says 70, you feel phenomenal. And you might find that your sleep score, when it says 100, you feel like crap. You wake up feeling tired and sluggish and whatever. So I would not use it as like, I need to hit 100 on this. I need this number to be that number. I need it. Like it's not gospel, right? This is, we're not launching space shuttles here, dude. This is biology. It's messy. There's variability, right? There's a lot of nuance to everything. And so I would say your heart rate variability over time compared to your activities could be a good guidance for, hey, when I go to sleep a little earlier, this looks a little better. I go to sleep a little later, this looks a little better. I spend a little extra time in bed, this looks a little better. I put my workout at this time of the day. I cut my caffeine off at this time of the day. Like you have to have some kind of behavior that you're measuring against, and then look at that trend and say, is this trend going the way I want it to be? Is it associated with, the changes I think are positive? Does this look that way? But the most important thing that I always tell people is how you feel and perform is far more important than what that device says. I have older patients who have no interest in technology whatsoever. And they do the same thing with a journal, right? Like they write down what time they went to sleep. They write down what time they wake up. They write down if anything happened during the night, how they slept. They write down how their day went before they go to sleep that night. They record their workouts. They say I worked out from this time to that time. Some of them are more detailed than that, whatever. You can get as detailed as you want with the pen and paper as well. And then same thing, they use that over the course of time. We can guide behaviors. I have patients who wear tracking devices. He'll say, shoot me a text first thing in the morning and be, my readiness score is down and my heart rate variability is 50 and I slipped this out. I'm like, hey, that's a single data point off of a very unreliable device, right? These things are, making estimations and they're running algorithms.
Dr. Kirk Parsley, ladies and gentlemen, a deep dive on sleep. Thank you so much for giving us so much amazing and tangible information that we can pay forward to the community. Sleep is probably the number one biohacking tool that most people are missing.
I agree.
Today was super fun. Thank you for your time and your energy, my man. Take care, buddy.
All right. You're welcome. Thank you.
See ya.